because like we were just having a good time or whatever, and I may have said something completely impulsive and completely forgotten, as opposed to when my RSD kicks in and I may say something impulsive and perseverate on it for days. It's so much fun living in our heads, isn't it?
Absolutely. I looked into having him assessed in Ireland, and the minimum waiting list that I could find was about between 2.5 and 3 years.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the ADHD Eavesdrop, where you can be a butterfly on the wall and listen in on my conversations. Today, I'm so excited. We have Rachel Currivan with us this week, and she is from Ireland. She's somebody that I met through my class, and I know we've got a lot of people through my class, but I've got people all over the world and I love the idea that we get to introduce all of these people to you. So, Rachel is a teacher and she's also an ADHD coach in Ireland. So, she's got some different perspectives, hopefully, that she can bring into the conversation. Um, and before we get started, I just want to make sure that you guys know that you can reach her at Rachel Currivan Life
Yes.
Coaching.com, and I will have her details below. Rachel, I'm so glad that you're here.
Lovely to be here, Janine. And it's lovely to have the opportunity to have a chat. Really looking forward to it.
Really looking forward to having a different perspective outside of North America. So let's get this conversation started. And Rachel, you were late diagnosed ADHD, just like I was. Tell
Yeah.
me about that.
Well, it came about formally after my eldest son was diagnosed. So he was 22, and he had been struggling with college, and ultimately had been struggling all his life. There was always something, I could say, amiss with him, but there was just something that was always a little bit off. And he was tested when he was 3 for ADHD. He was tested when he was 7, and he was tested once again then before he reached the age of 12. And each time it came back that he didn't have ADHD. So I kind of put it to bed at that point, thinking that, whatever I'm noticing and whatever's going on is not ADHD, definitely. So either it's just him and his idiosyncrasies, or, it's something else completely different. I remember when I was actually in Canada on holiday, and I bought some books for work. They were two of them were about ADHD, and I read the signs, if you like, of what a person with ADHD might experience. And as I read them, I was saying, oh yeah, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. And so there was ticks for everything. And my mum and dad were on holidays with us, and I said it to my mum. I said, Mum, I think I have ADHD. And she said, Rachel, she said, do not be ridiculous. You do not have ADHD. So I said, are you sure? She said, of course. So I said, okay, just kind of put it to bed really after that. But, I always knew that there was something different, I suppose, about me, all my life. Just like my son, I more or less accepted the fact that, okay, maybe everybody is a little bit different and maybe this is just the norm. He then had been living away from home for a year and a half, and he came back in quite a poor state in terms of the fact that he hadn't really looked after himself properly. And in conversations, it was kind of almost organic. There was no light bulb moment where he said, I have ADHD, or I said, I think you do. We just kind of came about it, and during our chats, he said, Mum, I think I might have ADHD. And I said, yeah. I said, look, it's probably worth getting it checked out properly. I looked into having him assessed in Ireland, and the minimum waiting list that I could find was about between 2.5 and 3 years. And I thought that he was quite vulnerable. So I searched in England, and I found a psychiatry group in London, and they did assessment online, and the waiting list, I think, was maybe 2 weeks. So I booked an appointment, and he had his assessment. Then I spoke to the psychiatrist myself afterwards, and he said, look, Rachel, he said, it was just textbook. He said, one of the fastest diagnoses that he was able to make. And that I suppose really was the start. And then everything that he had mentioned, I recognized as well. So I said, okay, look, I'll have an assessment done too. And then I was assessed by an absolutely, oh, he was the most lovely, lovely man. And this, he was in Dublin. I was put on their cancellation list because I had explained to him that I was really, I was kind of all over the place, struggling quite a bit between my eldest son, and then my middle son then said, look, Mom, I think I might have ADHD as well. And suddenly it just exploded. So I explained this to the psychiatrist, and he said, look, I'll put you on a cancellation list because I can see that it really is impacting you a lot. So I was diagnosed then just over a year ago. Then my middle son then was diagnosed after that, and then my daughter. So we went from, having nobody with ADHD in the house to suddenly having four of us. So my poor husband is the only one who is not diagnosed with anything.
Your story just resonates so much with me because I did the same thing with my daughter at 3, at 9, at 15. I had her tested 3 times and they said, nope, it's anxiety, it's depression, it's not ADHD. She finally just got her diagnosis within the last year. And so I know that frustration. And my son was diagnosed with ADHD before I was. And then I got diagnosed. And then my husband got diagnosed. And so here we are, like, oh my gosh, our whole family has ADHD, and it explained so much. It was like, okay, this is why we're the fun family, the chaotic family, the family that, never has a clean house, because we all have ADHD, but because we were all living together, it was perfectly normal.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, my husband laughs and he says he is the only, in inverted commas, normal person in the house. And that's when the four of us fall around laughing because he's not.
There's nothing normal about it, right?
No, there isn't. No. So we'll allow him to live in his little bubble. But I would strongly suspect that there's a lot going on. I'll put it like that.
You
Yeah.
said like you were really struggling. Like even the doctor said, I can tell that you're really struggling. What were some of the things that you were struggling with that kind of made you go, oh my gosh, I really need help?
I think it was the fact that my children were, so let's say my eldest boy was, he had started college, and my other fellow was going to start college. And I suppose that time brings up a lot of angst for parents, what are they going to do? What are they going to study? Is it going to suit them? So all of these questions were coming up for me and for them as well. So I think that was probably part of it. And I would imagine that I had probably come to the end of my tether of being able to cope as things were. Because as people, my children were becoming more and more complicated. And the difference between how they were presenting in their lives and most other teenagers and people in their early 20s was becoming, the difference was becoming greater and greater and greater. So when I had imagined that things were going to become a little bit easier and calmer, and my children were going to start taking up their adult roles and take responsibility, none of that was happening. So things were becoming, I suppose, more and more fraught. I also think that I had probably been coping as best as I possibly could and had reached I
Tipping
suppose,
point.
my capacity. Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
Yeah.
and like we talked about in our class, and I still talk about a lot with a lot of my clients, is hitting that tipping point where all of those coping mechanisms that we have been using all of our lives because we're extremely intelligent, creative people, suddenly, for whatever reason, they aren't working anymore. And that's when you hit that tipping point, and that's when you're like, I don't know what's going on. And then the diagnosis.
Janine, there probably was, a maturity there as well that was probably telling me, Rachel, this is not right. You shouldn't have to cope with this much. There shouldn't be this much turmoil going on in your head because, I had recognized that there had been, let's say when I started college, I was absolutely in free fall at that time when the children were very small. Same thing. So I think I probably at that point recognized, hold on a sec now, this is a time where there is a lot of stress And it seems like we're just reliving this a situation that's really difficult again. So I think probably the maturity just said, enough. This really is too much.
Well, I mean, that really brings up an important point about like how, people will say, well, how did you not know you had ADHD until you were an adult? ADHD changes so much throughout your life, and sometimes it's very manageable, and sometimes it's so overwhelming you don't know what to do with it, but it's there the whole time. It's just how well you're managing it. And like to the point where in the DSM, which is what we use in the United States for psychological disorders, it says, that it's a pervasive and consistent thing that affects your life. So there are times where you may be coping so well that you won't actually meet the definition of the DSM and not get an ADHD diagnosis. But then when you're in a bad coping period, then you might have the diagnosis. So I think a lot of times it's really frustrating because people don't understand that even though you have ADHD all your life, it exhibits itself in so different of ways throughout your life that it doesn't, if you're a 5-year-old boy bouncing off of the wall, that doesn't mean you're going to be a 50-year-old man bouncing off of the wall, right? So yeah, that just brings that up. It changes. I
Does.
coped with it well here. I didn't
Mm,
cope with it well here.
absolutely. Yeah. And, Janine, because there are, I suppose people with ADHD have over an 80% chance of having a coexisting condition. In my case, one of the conditions is autism. So that in my instance did me a lot of favors because I'm extremely neat. I'm extremely organized as a person, very practical, and all of those things helped a lot. So they allowed me to mask hugely, and to hide the disarray, I suppose, wasn't so visible outwardly, but obviously massively inside. And I think our education when we're very small plays a big part as well. So I was very, I suppose, drilled as a child and brought up in a very strict environment. So you knew exactly how to behave, and there were repercussions if you didn't. So it, I suppose, curtailed the tendencies that you might have, let's say, to behave in a chaotic manner, to a large extent. So I grew up with lots and lots of boundaries, and a feeling that I must stay within those boundaries. Of that would have hidden an awful lot of tendencies that would have otherwise come out.
It's funny because my son-in-law, I don't know, you said you may have listened to his
I did, yes.
podcast. He
Yeah.
too suspects he has autism and ADHD, and he kind of says the same thing. My autism kind of sometimes equals out and balances what goes on with the ADHD, because where my daughter is like, she can make a list and she just can't get herself going on it. He can look at the list and be like laser focused on a topic because of that autism and be like, "Ugh," and get it right done. So it's really interesting to hear you say the same kind of thing. Like it kind of balances out in some ways. Yet we're both, the autism and the ADHD are considered to be neurodivergence.
I remember behaving in certain ways when I was younger, and the behavior, absolutely appalled me because I couldn't explain why I had done certain things because they were, totally out of character. And they were not things that I would ever have done. So they must have been moments where I just did things that were just totally impulsive. And that impulsivity almost, removed my memory because I remember being asked about them. Did you do this? And with 100% honesty, I said, absolutely not, I didn't, because I had no memory of doing it at all, and also couldn't believe that I would have behaved in that way. So those instances I found those really, I actually never got over those because they just never sat well, and I could never explain why those had happened.
I can remember kind of some instances like that too, where somebody would say, I can't believe you said that, or I can't believe you did that. And it's like, I did what? No, I didn't. And because like we were just having a good time or whatever, and I may have said something completely impulsive and completely forgotten that I ever even said it. As opposed to when my RSD kicks in and I may say something impulsive and perseverate on it for days. It's so much fun living in our heads, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. It is just
Right.
like a ping pong ball, isn't it? Just pinging any direction that it wants. And yeah.
I really wanted to make sure that I brought in because like Rachel and I have worked together for a long time, coaching each other, working on this whole ADHD thing. And after we have been coaching together probably almost a year, you came into a session and you said, guess what? I have auditory processing disorder. And I was like, that makes so much sense, based on what we had worked on in coaching. And now I'm thinking, that I might have some of those tendencies too. But tell me a little bit about what that auditory processing disorder was like for you and what the diagnosis meant for you.
Okay. So again, this diagnosis came on the foot of my daughter being diagnosed as well. And how it manifests in me is that I find it very hard to, um, I suppose, to follow the train of any verbal information that I hear. So, for example, if I was in conversation with friends and so on, and they would mention, names and places and things, I would find it very hard to remember the names and places. Um, if I am watching television, and there are a number of different characters that come in, I find it very difficult to remember who each person is. Sometimes I even get faces mixed up, if people look a little bit like each other, I'm kind of saying, is that person or another person? So I would always have to have subtitles on to help me. And my husband as well to stop whatever we're watching and have to ask him, what's happening now? What's happening now? What's happening now? So that's another thing. I find it very tricky to take notes. So let's say if somebody were to call out notes, for example, or to be in a lecture situation where you take down notes. Again, I find it very hard to work at the speed that everybody else works at. So it's much slower. Um, and then in putting things into words, so to go from what I read to what I speak, there's also an extra layer there that it doesn't flow easily. There's kind of a break where extra processing has to happen before I can make sense of things. So it's a delay between what I hear and can understand, and then what I understand and can express in whatever manner that happens to be. With that then comes hypersensitivity to sound and just I suppose the inability to be able to transfer auditory messages seamlessly and to be able to rely on myself to be able to do so. So those, I suppose, something else might pop up now in a minute, Janine, but that's kind of the gist of what I can remember at the moment.
So when you talk about those things, so many of them like ring with me. Like if somebody's going to give me directions, don't tell me. Just write it down. Just write it down. And don't tell me street names. Give me like landmarks, right? There's a big gas station on the corner. That I can know, but the street names are so difficult. And I don't know about you, but when you're talking about the reading, it really made me think because when I read, I found out that a lot of people don't do this, but I actually hear the words in my head. So I read to myself and then process what I'm reading, where a lot of people go straight from the word to
Mhm.
understanding, and they skip that whole process of actually reading the words out loud.
The words have to be read, all of
Every
them,
one of
and they
them.
have to be
The
heard.
A, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And they have to be visualized as well.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So
Um,
there's just like so many things there that, and it is extremely common for this to be a comorbid disorder that goes along with ADHD as well. Not that I'm trying to diagnose myself with something
I
brand
know.
new or anything like that, but and I realize I have compensated myself a lot for that. I don't remember names of places. I can be a place and have a great evening there and then drive away from it and not be able to remember the name of the place.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the ADHD or, what that is, but if somebody tells me their name, they may have well just said blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Because until I know you, I'm not going to know your name,
No.
right? Because I can't process that and keep it in my head.
Yes, because in order to be able to remember a name, I would have to associate the name with something, or take note of the person so that I can I suppose match their face with the name. So all of that is going on while the person has said their name, and then you're trying to listen to what they're saying to you as well, because you don't want to be rude. So between all of that going on, then the name just gets lost in the
Yeah.
in the process. Yeah.
I also read, oh, I wish I could I remember where I read the article. I read an article where people with ADHD and with auditory processing issues oftentimes will remember the first initial sound of the person's name, but not remember the whole name. So like I would be, I don't know, it's Rachel, Rebecca, Rhonda, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Because we only had time to process the initial sound.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it wouldn't be uncommon to say, oh yes, that person's name begins with an R or an N, or or something like that. And that then would be the sum of what has
A-
gone on. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I don't know if that's part of the I think it would be because you're auditorily trying to process that name and you
Mm.
only get to the first sound before it's gone.
Because you're being distracted by what the rest of the sounds that are coming at you as well. I would say, Janine, it's probably a combination of the inattentiveness of the ADHD having an impact, and then the slowness of the speed of the processing then of the auditory processing disorder then impacting back, and there's probably like a ping pong thing going on between the lot. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to bring in the fact that you are also a teacher. Aside from being a coach, you're a teacher, and we have that in common. I spent 30 years teaching. What did getting your diagnosis, learning more about ADHD, learning more about auditory processing, what did that do for you as a teacher?
It first of all made me much more tolerant and patient with how I worked myself. I, quite often would get very impatient because while I'm very organized and structured, something would upset the process of this organization and structure. So there would be some little missing link. So, it would always take me longer to find where I put things in strange places, because that was the way that the train of thought that was happening at the time. For example, I could open an email and in responding to that email might notice another email that has come in that's got something else to do, and that then could prompt something that, oh yes, I need to prepare this for this class. And then when I'm doing that, oh yes, I promised blah 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 that I would do something for that class, and suddenly I could be doing 20 things instead of just the one thing that I needed to do. So that used to frustrate me so much, whereas now I understand why I do that, and can either go with it if I have the time, or have to say to myself, Rachel, come on, get back with the program now and stick with what you're going to do, because that it's not going to work very well. So that was a huge thing. I noticed as well that when I taught, I tended to bounce around a lot. So, as one idea would come into my head, I would link that with maybe some other subject that I was teaching or other things that the girls were learning, which is great for their overall learning, but probably not so great for their initial learning. So I could see that I wasn't maybe as structured as I could be. It also made me so much more tolerant of the girls that I teach, because it gave me much more of an awareness of what they could potentially be dealing, what they could be struggling with, I suppose, in dealing with whatever they had to deal with in the day. So I think probably a more patient, understanding, wiser person, probably, I think. Yeah, they would be the most notable things that it has made a difference with.
So I know that we do have some listeners in Ireland. And I would love for you to bring forward the plight of what you just told me way back at the beginning of the 2-year waiting list. Tell me more about what it's like to try to get diagnosed in Ireland and how you ended up getting diagnosed in the UK instead, or in England instead.
So, Janine, the huge issue here is lack of professionals available to diagnose. That's, I suppose, the biggest part. So, in Ireland, both psychologists and psychiatrists can diagnose the condition, but only psychiatrists obviously can prescribe medication. So it means that while individuals can be diagnosed, they can't necessarily be treated with medication if they want to. Yes, of course, they can have lots of other treatments, but medication is the one that they can't have unless they see a psychiatrist. And there is a huge shortage of psychiatrists in the country. Many psychiatrists will work with Irish clients from their own countries. So they could be European countries, they could be countries in the US. It's mostly kind of European countries because there's the whole problem about prescribing, and all of that. And there's also a little bit of a money racket going on in that you can charge a lot of money to diagnose individuals with ADHD. So that's the lucrative part. It's the caring for them really that's the much harder part. So there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of individuals here that are diagnosed and are in a kind of a limbo really because they can't get the aftercare that they need. And also, if you are diagnosed here, many practices will refuse to take patients who are diagnosed for treatment because they haven't been diagnosed by that particular clinic or that particular psychiatrist. So you just lost basically in the sea of ADHD. There is there's a fantastic organization, ADHD Ireland, who have done amazing work for a long, long, long time. They, of course, been battling with funding and with having presence in different counties because Dublin is the biggest county in Ireland, greatest population, and an awful lot of the resources are located there, whereas the rest of the country then really just misses out on a lot. And also the fact that it's only in the recent past that the awareness has become, I suppose, just the awareness really that there are lots and lots and lots of people with ADHD.
A lot
Yeah,
more than anybody really suspected. And I
absolutely.
know some people would love to say, oh, they just diagnose everybody with ADHD these days. I argue that they just didn't diagnose anybody with it before. And now, as adults
Absolutely.
anyway, and
Yes.
now they've started to diagnose us and
Yeah.
find us.
There's a, that obviously there's a huge misperception on social media, where, everybody has a little bit of ADHD and so on. And that um, they also the fact that, when people are diagnosed, they tend to be diagnosed in clusters. But, people with ADHD attract other people with ADHD because they have, the same types of energy, they have the same ways of behaving. So, let's say clusters of friends and their families could end up by all being diagnosed. And then it gives people the impression that, oh my gosh, everybody has ADHD. Look at all these people who've all been diagnosed, forgetting then that there are, thousands of other groups of people and families and so on who will never be diagnosed. So it's yeah, I suppose it's the clustering of people really that makes the diagnosis percentages seem to be massive.
Well, and just like you said, like we went from families that had no ADHD diagnosed in them to our entire families. Like myself having my mother even included in this at 79 years old, she got diagnosed. Where 5 years ago, we would not have been considered a family of ADHDers. But now we are, and it happened very quickly because once the dominoes start to fall and things start to fall into place, and you start to see, and we know that genetics plays a huge role in ADHD. I can't say it's 100%, but it's pretty predominant. So yeah, those clusters of people then suddenly are getting diagnosed. And then we tend to be drawn to things that maybe neurotypical people aren't drawn to as much. We're always seeking that dopamine, right? And so we are drawn to each other. There have been times where I've looked around and I've said, who doesn't have ADHD? I have ADHD, everybody's got ADHD. And then I think, yeah, because I run in that circle. And it's the big difference I want people to understand about ADHD is it's something that's been there from childhood, whether you've been able to control it, cope with it, whatever, and manage it. It's been there from childhood. It is a difference in the brain and it's pervasive. And so when people say, oh, everybody's got a little ADHD, no, everybody's got some executive functioning issues of some sort or another that they struggle with. That doesn't mean you have a little ADHD. And if you forgot your phone a couple days ago or whatever, that doesn't mean you have ADHD. I forget my phone and lose my phone probably 6 to 7 times a day. Yes, you have some executive things that you run into, but how pervasive are they in your life?
Absolutely.
And how much
Yeah.
they affect how you handle your life? Because usually when adults get diagnosed with ADHD, it's when they can't handle their lives anymore.
And Janine, if it's something that can be detected on brain scans, they can see now when they do a scan, they can see a brain that has ADHD because it looks different.
It does
So
look.
that's huge. I mean, if you were to go perhaps on the statistics that they have on the inmates in prisons, they reckon 85% of convicted prisoners have ADHD. So you could say, oh my gosh, do 85% of the population have it? No, but it's just that people with it are highly likely to end up in, situations that will lead them to being in prison or to being addicted to a variety of different things.
Mhm.
So there are certain areas of life where it will be really dominant, and others then practically probably non-existent.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Where it's like the one person with ADHD is like the oddball out, where
Absolutely. And I think, the more that I learn about the condition, the more there is to know. It's just, it literally is endless, the impact that it has. And, ultimately fascinating. And I think it probably will allow us to learn so much more about the human race and the possibilities that we have as humans, the more we learn about how the non typical brain works and operates, and how it can thrive and survive, and negotiate challenges and difficulties. So yeah.
just because there's fewer of us doesn't mean that we aren't amazing.
Yes, absolutely. Totally. Because we've been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And another thing, Janine, that could also be increasing I suppose, the awareness is that our modern day behavior can cause some of the symptoms that mimic ADHD. So excessive use of screen time, the focusing on electronics and the use of electronics for stimulation are creating problems with individuals that are mimicking, not all, but quite a few of the same symptoms, if you like, of ADHD. So there will be lots of traits that are, that are across the board, but it's not the condition, but it's just that the traits that are being expressed in the individuals are very similar.
Mhm. And the symptomology of what we're seeing with our population right now, and there are a lot of ADHD characteristics that go along with that, and people look like they have ADHD or feel like they have ADHD. It's a great demonstration of the neuroplasticity of our brains, right? Because not only can we play with it and create positive change, but our brains are elastic and they learn and they change. And the more we expose ourselves to the social media and the more we expose ourselves to that constant intake of dopamine, our brains are neuroplasticity wise um, changing to need those things more.
Yeah.
What I want to point out is because our brains are moldable or, plastic like, we can also make the positive changes. And that's what, I mean, when we do coaching, that's what we do is we say, we're going to teach you how to manipulate your brain and work with your brain to make some positive changes. But it can go both ways. And it seems like the negative way goes so much easier.
Yeah, it does. And, that's because, so many children, grow up with negative reinforcement over and over and over again. So they get used to expecting negativity and responding to negativity. And that then becomes part of the person that you are, so you then can grow up to to an adult who, has the same way of thinking. Whereas, if in coaching, we can, turn that round, and instead of being negative, just absolutely only focus on the positive. It's can be life changing, and it can be so so freeing and liberating. I follow Dr. Amen on follow his podcasts and have read some of his books and so on. And he is the most amazingly interesting doctor. But he talks about the constant searching for those dopamine hits. And he talks about the damage, that we are doing to the neurons in our brains, because we literally, now this is really simplified, but we literally are wearing them out, so wearing out those pathways. So, it becomes just like a drug addict. You start off, needing a low level of drugs, and then you need higher and higher and higher. And it's the same thing with with the dopamine. So the more dopamine you get, the more you need. And that's why, the addictiveness, I suppose, to devices is really, really, really dangerous.
Mhm. And that kind of makes me think. I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine this morning about how social media is really it's built into social media for people with ADHD to, I'm trying to think, they target us. There you go. People with
Yes.
ADHD, they're not saying we're targeting people with ADHD, but really we're the ones who click on that ad or decide, we're the ones who impulsively follow those ads and impulsively buy those things and impulsively do those things that maybe aren't great for us, where a neurotypical person is more capable of saying, yeah, I'm not susceptible to that.
Yeah.
And so she was talking about how she feels like, there's almost a ADHD tax kind of when it comes to social media because we're the target.
Yeah. And because, people with ADHD have such an issue with or can have such issues with managing money and spending and buying anyway. The fact that it is so easy to do with just a couple of clicks online means that I suppose as an audience of customers, we are extremely vulnerable to the effects, really, and being manipulated by that, that whole system, if you
Mm.
like.
Oh, yeah, use all the bright colors and the
Yeah,
sounds and
yeah,
and all the things, and we're drawn right into it. Not that neurotypical people aren't, but I believe that there's a higher percentage of ADHD folks that are clicking on those links and that are, spending this money that they don't need to be spending. And like when you're on Facebook and this ad pops up about this cute little, pillow or something like that. And you're like, oh, my aunt would love that. And the next thing you know, you're on the site, you're buying your aunt the pillow, you're buying yourself a sweatshirt. And
yeah,
we're so susceptible to it.
yeah. And the fact that, I think we probably believe an awful lot of what we read and see, or take it as being, the truth. And there isn't time to analyze, is this product reliable? Does it do its job? Am I being manipulated? All of that. There's just no time for any of those thoughts to take place that should really, and probably others are doing that, and they're being much more measured in the way that they approach the
Yeah, and I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine. I have a lot of conversations, obviously, but we were just talking about kind of that same thing, as far as we don't take the space.
Mhm.
We run our lives like we are a train on a train track and we are going forward. And, train tracks don't have a lot of stops,
No.
right? And so we don't have a pause button. And so once we're clicked, we're off and going. Where a neurotypical person, although maybe tempted to click or even do click, generally have a better ability to stop,
Mm.
reflect, take that space, and
Yeah.
make a decision rather than an impulsive decision.
Yeah, because they, will have experienced that in action and know that it works. The stop, the pause, the reflect, the analyze, and that becomes habitual. Whereas, people with ADHD haven't had that training. So, they're just loose cannons, basically.
Right. But with neuroplasticity, we can
Yes,
learn it, right?
exactly. We
We
can.
can
We
learn.
can.
And
Yeah.
I have learned
Mm.
to take that pause a lot better than I used to. And it has saved me money.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
It's
Um, I noticed, Janine, just, as a complete aside, that when my daughter was about 7 or 8, she began to really appreciate money because she would have got, for her, quite a lot of money for, let's say, for her communion as presents, so that she would have been about 8. And she spent and spent and spent and bought and bought and bought. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have to try to teach her not to do that, because I could see her taking that, on into her teens and just being unable to control herself. Um, so I probably was very, I don't know, some people might say I was probably a little bit harsh on her with her money, but I would say to her, do you need that? Do you must you spend that money? Do you have that at home? Do you have anything like that at home? And she would stop and think and say, actually, I do have something like that, Mum, or what I have isn't finished yet and I'll wait. So she was able to teach herself over the years not to be, not to fritter away those small amounts of money, because those small amounts, will build and build and build to be a large amount. So
Mhm.
that was a skill that she was able to, to take on, if you like. But I would have been really concerned about her if she hadn't done that.
So yeah, that's something that you saw in her as a child, that impulsive spending that,
Yeah.
and that's how we can get ourselves in so much trouble because we don't have delayed gratification. There's no such thing as delayed gratification. It's torture. That's all it is. There's either I get it now or torture, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or else, if I don't get it now, torture, and then eventually then you just can't cope anymore. So you either have to, you just have to forget it, and then you move on to the next thing, and you just
That you have
constantly.
to have right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like the whole idea of us living in the now,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
so time horizons and not see, if you push something out too far, it's not even part of our reality anymore.
No.
And in education, I can remember talking to teachers and saying we have to increase the frequency of rewards for this kid. And they're like, well, we're giving him a reward every 15 minutes. And I'm like, yeah, but he's like, it's not real to him unless it's every 5 minutes, right? And knowing where that cutoff is, because some people can say, yes, 2 years from now, I'm going on a cruise, I'm working for it now, I'm doing all the things, where that cruise doesn't even seem real to me until 6 months before it happens, if that, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Because
So
there's
there's
the, yeah,
that
the
time
object.
is so different.
Absolutely, Janine. And the whole, object permanence, that what is going on in the moment is the only thing that is possible. So everything is all our energy and everything is consumed in the moment. And the future then is not the moment. So it is not, it has no relevance whatsoever.
Mm-mm. And I think, that's part of why, like, also people with ADHD often have a hard time learning from their mistakes because once it's over, it's over.
Yes.
It's not in the now. I'm not feeling that pain now. I'm not feeling that discomfort now. So it's hard for me to remember what that felt like
Yeah,
to make good decisions now.
absolutely. And also the steps that were taken to get them to that state of failure were probably not clear either. So they probably have no idea how they got themselves into the situation to make the mistake as well. So there is very, very, very little learning really to be had.
Absolutely. There are so many things in the ADHD world that you don't think of, when you think of ADHD, or not when we think about it, but a lot of times when people think of ADHD, they think of that little boy bouncing off of the walls, right?
Mm.
Or somebody who's like, squirrel, squirrel. And there's so much more to it, in the ways that it affects our lives.
Yeah, because everybody mentions about dopamine all the time, but serotonin is massively impacted. So that causes huge lows, and these lows are unexplained. There's no reason why a person gets so low, and that's just because their serotonin is impacted as well. Um, and that can have a massive impact. Over years, it can make people feel very, very down and very low for a very long length of time. And that's just because their body is just not giving them, is not able to provide them with that kind of happy calmness, that others can have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So with that lovely thought, I have had a great time talking with you, Rachel, and I hope that you'll come back on again sometime.
I would love to, Janine, because during our conversation now we have talked about so many things, and I'm now thinking, oh, must research all of those things. Must find out more about them, and I suppose the possibilities for change, positive change and change for the better then are just immense and endless. So it's so hopeful, and it is so exciting really to learn more and to be part of that community and that learning.
So Rachel, if our butterflies on the wall that have been listening in like our content and like what we were talking about, what should they do?
They should push the like button and push the subscribe button, Janine.
Perfect. And we'll see you next time.